All right, we are right at that 11 a.m. mark. So I just want to say a quick welcome to everybody on behalf of Indie Design Week. Welcome to day one. We've got lots planned for you throughout the week, but thank you for joining us for the very first virtual talk of the week. We have DELV Design with us here to talk about their renovation of the Stutz building, Divergence and Invention. Sorry about that. I will be here as the IDW moderator, so feel free to drop some questions in the chat as they get started and as they're going through, and we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. But without further ado, Cara and Jeremy, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Go ahead and share the screen here.
Jeremy's doing that. Good morning, everyone. I know we're not in person together, but in spirit, we're sharing a cup of coffee together. I've got mine right here. I've probably already had too much, so I will try to make sure I don't talk too quickly based on that coffee. And then go ahead and write your questions that you have in the chat as mentioned, and then at the end, we'll kind of open it up to Q&A. We're going to be giving an overview and then would really love to just make this conversational for things that are interesting for all of us to talk about. Really excited to be involved with Indie Design Week again. My name is Cara Weber. I am a partner and architect here at DELV Design.
I'm Jeremy Welly, also an architect and partner at DELV Design.
So today we're going to be talking about the Stutz building, Divergence and Invention, and it's about the making and remaking of a century-old landmark. DELV Design, we named our studio after this concept and really want to emphasize how important it is to inquire deeply about the motivations behind design and the implications of what designs do for humans and for communities. So this is just a quick glimpse at our current studio. We're a mid-sized studio. And we work with a lot of different types of clients. We like to keep our projects diverse and interesting. Because of that and our philosophy and our process, it's taken us to a lot of different project types intentionally. So we do civic work, fire stations, city halls, et cetera, healthcare, life sciences, multifamily residential, higher ed, workplace, planning, and then schools and hospitality, of which we're going to see some of today. So it's just a glimpse of the breadth of the type of projects that we like to tackle from both an architecture and an interior design standpoint. So DELV Design, we talk a lot about and we are going to try to get our slides to be full screen here. So bear with us.
Which we thought they were.
We thought they were. We have gotten a note that they're not. So thank you for our note deliverer. So while we're working on how to make those.
Curious what people are seeing. I don't know if you can hear. It must be cropped.
Yeah, I think we can just see like the whole program. So we can see like the line over the line of slides on the left as well. See
your launch picture in picture mode. Let's try that. That does anything for you?
Not yet.
Picture. I'm gonna try to
view, maybe.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to share again here. See what happens. Entire screen. Let's try that. How's that look?
Oh yeah, yep, that looks great.
All right. We had the one technology thing, right? Now we're official.
Like I said, day one, talk one.
We'll get through the new software. It's perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for that, and jump in if there's other issues that are coming up as we're kind of figuring this out live. Awesome. So So a bit about who we are, and then also I think it's important to talk about what we believe, and we think that this transcends absolutely beyond architecture and interior design. We believe good design, these are our design tenets at DELV. We believe good design is empathetic. We believe it is honest, beautiful, useful, and resilient. And there's a big emphasis that we have on the first one, empathetic, and the others are supportive expressions of that. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the approach to the STETS redesign. Our approach is really rooted in design thinking. So a critical component at the beginning of any of our projects is understanding what is, and we do some diverging and converging on seeking the correct problem to solve and defining what those parameters are. And then after we do that, and that's a real discipline to not jump into design solutions, after we do that, problem seeking is when we jump into the problem solving. This is where we explore what could be. And again, we like to emphasize a real and exercise an importance of creating a lot of options, wild options that are going to be way too far. And we know when we've gone too far that we've done enough options so that when we can pull back to what should be, and then we move into the implementation. So what that looks like in our industry, not sure of who's on the call with us today, but for architecture and interior design, we start with that kind of first phase of understanding what is aligns with the pre-design efforts, where we define our design problem. And then to the right, you see that explore what could be. That's where we jump into schematic design, and then all the phases to the right. As we all know, construction is very complicated. So there's a lot of phases and a lot of work to the right past just kind of these early imaginings that we start with. So our vision at DELV, and we believe and hope this is a vision shared by many, many people, that we desire a world in which people, communities, and nature are thriving. So this kind of trifecta of lenses that we want to look through our projects with are something at every level, from that pre-design through construction administration, we want to make sure we're being successful in. So why do we care about the STETS, and how do we get involved with it? DELV Design formed in 2014 with 4 partners. Jeremy are 2 of the co-founders, and we moved into the STETS in 2015. So it's been a wild ride. We loved the space. We loved how eclectic it was, really raw, really authentic space. And it just felt exactly right for this startup design studio with a lot of gumption. It's not a word I say often, but here we are. And so what we want to talk about today is design intervention is a moment. Sometimes designers can get this feeling of being the hero designer, or being your scale of importance can feel really critical at a certain moment. But I think there's a really important part of remembering that it's part of a much bigger story. Design intervention is a fulcrum, and it's not necessarily the main character of the story. There's histories that lead into why you arrive at some design problem that's worth solving. And so that's something that is very critical to our approach and framework. So here's the STETS building. If you're familiar with it, maybe you've gone to some of the really cool events over the years that have happened. Here's how it existed a few years ago. And it is nearly a century, I would say, well, it's just ticked over a century old building. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But our framework and our approach is kind of asking the question, we need to understand the story of who the STETS was. And yes, we're going to personify the building a bit, because we want to ask that all-important question, what do you want to be next to the building, to the community? What does it need? What does it want to be? This is an image of the Japanese art form of kintsugi. So if you're familiar with it, it's when a ceramic is broken and maybe has lived a life, instead of kind of getting rid of it and discarding something, it is repaired and infilled with gold. And I believe kintsugi literally means to join with gold. So there's an approach to not discarding something, but really looking at it and understanding what was valuable about it, what can its future be, and the infill of the gold can be what is so beautiful and compelling. So this kind of framework of kintsugi is an approach, and I think maybe an attitude of design that we took toward the Stutz as we moved forward.
All right, so we're going to jump into the product a little bit more in more detail. And there's a lot to cover. So we also had to realize that there's probably more content than we have time. So hopefully we pared it down to what we think is some relatable elements about the design process and how do you really transform a building that's an important building within the urban fabric of Indianapolis. And before we get going, we also wanted to acknowledge too, this is a team effort. We were very fortunate to partner with Samara Road, who it takes a developer with a lot of courage and tenacity and momentum in a marketplace to really transform a building the size of the Stutz building. But also had engineers R.A. Diamond, LHB, and then a great local builder, Shield Sexton, that were really partners in this process. And then our studio as well. Cara and I are talking about it, but there's very few people, if any, in our studio that hadn't touched it in some degree throughout the project itself. So we want to break it into two big parts. So there's the building and its purpose. Understanding that a building, although is not a live person, it's an object, it must have a purpose. But at the same time, we have to focus on the building and the structure first to really understand its posture. So to do that, we're going to go back a little bit and give some context of the buildings themselves. So really the story begins in 1914. And before that, a little cadence too. So 10th Street and Capitol, the intersection, is what we're showing as Building A right now. There's actually an original Stutz factory that was built just south, or just south of 10th Street. But as it began to become more of a consumer product, they realized they had to expand pretty quickly. And a little bit of story there too, it was actually the Bearcat was racing the first Indianapolis 500. As we approach the month of May, we know Speedway transforms, and kind of the race history and culture in Indianapolis is very rich. And sometimes the Stutz building is forgotten within its role in a very integral part of the fabric of the larger Indianapolis and Indiana story. So as the building was built over time and the expansion was needed, you'll start to see that they started to build individual buildings connected together. So Building B was built in 1916. And then you have the F building, which is actually where our studio was located for 7 years, and the nice sawtooth roof. And a lot of that was really the loading docks of where a lot of the parts and materials would come in and the product would go out. And then a larger expansion in 1920 that expanded both the C, D, and E buildings. And over time, they did add a G building, but really the period of significance in the historical part of the Stutz building was really captured in that kind of early 1914 to the early 1930s, before to kind of the Great Depression and the World War II. They saw a decline in the sales, and like some, unfortunately, manufacturing stories where it kind of lived its life within that time, had a great impact on the economy, and then its time kind of went away. So this building was designed for a purpose, and that purpose was really insular. And a factory by itself, and you think of a factory location and manufacturing, you don't think of downtown Indianapolis, but at that time it was an appropriate use. So you'd see a lot of materials coming in and a great product going out. So we've got the arrows kind of signifying the idea that you've got this product going out the door. So really back in a product economy, when we were deeply involved into making things. And what we've seen is this shift in need to transform more into an experience economy. So when you do that, you've got a factory building that its posture is not one of welcoming. In fact, a lot of factory buildings are very guarded. You want to make sure you control who comes in and who goes out. So now as we start to shift more towards a different work environment where people are more mobile and then we get to choose where and how we want to work, we need to focus on the experience. And how do we do that? So this is just signifying the idea that really activating the space has to really look at how it becomes more extroverted by nature. So how do we do that? So how do you shift the building from introverted and extroverted? And it in some ways we kind of give the idea of a building as a person in many ways. You think of like a bank by itself traditionally want to be very guarded. The same way with a factory. An extroverted building, or when we talk about experience economy and really trying to pull people in and draw them in through curiosity, there has to be a posture of transparency and really vulnerability to allow people to be curious and to enter buildings. Well, the Stutz building over time was never quite that based on the factory. So you can see kind of windows that were enclosed or boarded up. The doors were mostly meant to egress and not to be entered. So you don't have a lot of transparency within the storefront. So a big part of what we want to do is make it more permeable. So by increasing impermeability means how do we create more interventions that allow for more glass on the first floor. And as a caveat too, we're going to talk a lot about the first floor activation of this space, really because that is kind of the heartbeat of what activates the building and the community involvement in the building. But we also want to highlight too the upper floors at a high level. So,
and I was going to also add, just to kind of build a mental map of the scale of this project, it's plus or minus 400,000 square feet, which translates to, I think, roughly 7 football fields worth of square footage. So when you think about, and that's all of the floors, and as Jeremy said, we're going to talk a lot about the first floor, but this is a pretty broad undertaking for Indianapolis and for the entire team.
Yeah, absolutely. And this shows the courtyard, and a big shift too is not only was the Stutz automobile manufactured and made in this building historically, a lot of these alleyways were really dominantly used by vehicles. So this was actually an old parking area in the alley. But by looking at more permeability and transparency, we started to reshape a space that was more about pedestrians and experiences. And now the automobile is no longer allowed in this space, and now it's full, both day and night, full of activity. And the next part of it we really want to look at was, how do you increase the legibility? And there's a lot of stories over the years in our F building experience. We were pretty close to the loading dock, and whether you're ordering food or you're having a client come in or you're visiting the Stutz, it's very hard to find where you're going. And I think Turner always loved the stories, the creative stories and ways people would describe their spaces, which is fun. And I think it served its purpose very well. However, over time, when you want to be more intuitive to the larger public, and as people start to travel a distance to come here for the first time or revisit, how do you make it more clear and legible for people visiting? So a couple of the images that we're showing are the entrances to the building. Even the overhead door that was shown there, it was, again, you could drive through the building. So it was very much transient between vehicular circulation as well as people. So it kind of had a mixed personality that way. So never quite made up its mind. But I think by moving more to the pedestrian experience, gives a chance to curate better entrances. The next part too is from 1992, this creative intervention that Turner had. He bought the building and brought new life to it, which there may be people on this presentation that either have gone to the open houses, or even if you had a studio there, it was a very special place. And I think it really created a place for creative studios, firms like ours that could start up and launch there. But over time, you can see in this first floor, this is a section cut showing the first floor. It became fairly confusing as people infilled those spaces. How do you actually find your way around it? So from a legibility standpoint, a lot of it was carving out and giving people orientation. So the pink area starts to talk about a large focus on how do you make the common areas not only tell a story and reflect the history of the Stutz, but just become very intuitive and wayfinding.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think, I know one of the focus of Design Week is a lot about divergence, which is certainly a part of the design process, but then the framework of looking at the history of the project itself. This project itself has lived a divergent history. So the quirkiness of the wayfinding was both confounding and delightful all at the same time. And so, yes, it needed to move into a new chapter, but there's a lot of divergence in how the building evolved over time with the type of studios and people in it that was very interesting. And we didn't want to kind of lose that spirit as we cleaned up and made the wayfinding more intuitive and empathetic back to our design tenants as well.
Absolutely. We'll talk a lot about the first floor, but I think a lot of this too, the intuitive wayfinding, is really creating a way for Class A office space on the second, fourth, third and fourth floors. And part of that is just when you have people visiting, having a great way to get to your office space and floor plates. That was a big focus as well. So here's some areas that were carved out, and a lot of it was getting rid of the areas and spaces that have been added over time, and carving it back to the historical core of the building. And now as you start to do that, it starts to expose more surface area, which allows for more permeability and transparency, and really areas for more retail space to infill. And then just going back to the historical kind of gateway and area along the alley. And it's neat to see how the space now truly is a place that has experiences. This is kind of a vision loft picture where weddings now happen in a place where we used to just park cars. And that transparency and legibility has now created a larger audience in a space and place that can now kind of open its venue up to much more broader audience. As far as an inanimate object of the building, so if we look at this now, and the posture of the building is now more extroverted, and the fact that it has more glass, it has easy way to get in and out. Every building and or product or design has to have a purpose. And then the purpose of this space is one of the most important parts of this, because now how do you figure out how do you put the uses in there that really bring this building to life? The change really talks to its next vibrant chapter. Samara did a really good job, I think, coming into Indianapolis and understanding the local market very well. And there was a lot of focus on local businesses that are doing a great job and really connecting at a local level, and finding the right mix that really reaches out to a wide variety of uses throughout the day. And we talk a little bit about Euclidic zoning and the mega block, and what's very common is people will do one type of use for a very large area. But in urban areas, the more vibrant uses and the mixture of uses create a space where if you have a workplace there, now you can do pretty much anything you want to from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And we'll kind of get into that more detail here in a second.
Yeah, considering the experience map and kind of that, if we flip our minds into a different type of design, the UX experience, we apply that to architecture and say, what do we want that experience to be throughout the day? What is the empathetic approach to how a person might want to spend their day? So really exciting. And then also it was important. We've got a whole team, and I don't know if we've gone through them by name, but we certainly want to shout out the folks on the team. But kind of paying homage to this really eclectic chapter that was most recent for Stutz with that local food, retail, fitness, work, and events. Like, that was an incredibly important tie to pull into this new iteration of these. Kind of the same story, pulling that thread through that story.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully we have another picture of the alleyway, but Kara's talking about Merritt Chase for landscape architecture, who did a really great job softening and activating the alleyway, which is a big part of a lot of the photographs and I think the experience of the Stutz. So now as we look back at the first floor, you can see the floor plates have been kind of cleaned out. We want to talk a little bit about the mixes of uses that have really come together to make really a great combination of uses. So as we start working our way around, there was a lot of attention to food and beverage early on. So the A building activation, which is a unique one because although there's 7 buildings, this is one that is kind of separated by the alley and can be activated by pedestrians throughout the day. But we started to look at this in Cafe Patachu, Vision Loft, you got Julietta Taco Shop, and Turner's Bar, all food and beverage and event space that now allows this building to be operated throughout the day. Just across the alleyway was Amelia's and Barista Parlor, offering great coffee experience and bakery experience, all which I'm a little jealous of. Like when you're there, I feel like there's very little reasons now to leave this block. There's a lot of draw to come to it now.
Yeah, anecdotally, we designed ourselves out of this space, which was at once the right design decision and also heartbreaking because we love it.
Absolutely. And then the car museum, if you were in the Stutz beforehand, Turner had a great collection of cars, and it was up on the upper floors. A big part of it was looking at loading dock and transforming the overhead doors to be glass and really starting to bring the story of the Stutz automobile. And it's a very unique collection to one that could be enjoyed by more people. It has a really good correlation too with Vision Lofts and events, because now you've got this kind of 1-2 combination that work really, really well together. And then I think one thing that gets overlooked sometimes in mixed use is just the need for fitness. And if you're working, depending on if you're in the office 8 to 5, whatever hours you're working, having some ability to either break out throughout the day and have fitness, or come to this destination if you live close by. Fitness is a really important integral part of the program as well. And then expanding down to the yoga, you have pattern and retail, so you have grounded as a shop as well. And then right in the core of the building is industrious, so co-working. So as Cara mentioned, a really large floor plate. A lot of these activation interventions happened pretty early on to really begin to make this first floor a very compelling space. So this is a good kind of look at the overall alleyway again, and Merritt Chase's design for the landscape architecture there. And then the wayfinding itself, again, looking at the transparency and kind of retail as it's carved out and overall wayfinding within the building. A lot of creativity through Pattern, who's working on a lot of the artwork, and it's been a really great collaboration of local artists to make this space continue to have the personality that it's always had. Looking at Amelia's, and again, like, as we look at these spaces, the bones of the building, having kind of a manufacturing background, the great concrete structure is one that we really wanted to maintain, and a lot of it is not changing too much of what was there. Really looking at the patina of it, and also just the exposed concrete floors, but then bringing enough refinement that really brings out the spaces and places that are there.
Yeah, you'll notice in these photographs as we jump through them that, again, we believe good design is honest. So honestly telling the history around every corner that we can in all of these design opportunities, of which there were many.
Absolutely. And Barista Parlor, who has a very unique bar design, kind of reflective back to the Indy 500 track, and kind of a great way to kind of embrace, I think any good location wants to have a great coffee, wants to have great food. Having a great coffee shop in the Studs was a great addition. And as lunchtime, and if you've been to the Cafe Patachu, it's been great to see how busy it is. And for a long time, it was kind of a struggle to figure out where to eat in this area. So I think now having multiple options between Amelia's and Cafe Patachu and Taco Shop, it's now become alive, and I think it's starting to pull a wider audience to this location. And then fitness, so Myriad Fitness in the G building. The G building was not a historic structure, but it was very great for a large workout location. And then Vision Lofts, looking at this thing arching all the way from all kinds of events, but you think of the important moments in life, and now this is a space where people can go have weddings all the way to great events. Again, it's kind of looking at how throughout the day and the weekend now this space can be filled and used. And then not forgetting too that there's a lot of great office space on the second, third, and fourth floors, starting to show the lobby areas and entrance to the upper floors. A big transformation too, and even the permeability, was taking the old factory windows and replacing those in ways that were acknowledged the same design and pattern, but a lot for more transparency. Over time, it was harder to see out of those. So office buildings in space, it really depends on having great daylight. So as you start to see, there's more and more activated space up on the upper floors for businesses to locate there, and seeing a lot of great companies fill the space as it is. Okay, so then also the eclectic history. So I think there's a very important part of the history, and there's still artist studios there that are very important. A big part of the process and project was going through and looking at the collection of all the artifacts that Turner had collected over the years, and trying to figure out how those could be knit into the space to still maintain part of that character. So you start to see the cars that are exhibited. In the next picture, we start to see how you can reuse the old window frames, and how a lot of the artwork can be reused and relocated throughout the common areas to tell the story still, all the way down to the fire doors, trying to maintain as much as we could. Although we know there's a lot of new functions there, a lot of the history is what makes this building so unique. And I think why it is such a desirable building. It's just impossible to create new buildings that have the amount of character that these old buildings have. So we didn't want to, the team wanted to make sure we embraced a lot of that eccentric and eclectic history and fun and whimsy of the Studs building that we all love so much.
So kind of to wrap this up, we wanted to talk about how we were a part of, again, as Jeremy mentioned, a large team that connected this building to a purpose for the sake of creating a hopeful future. Hopeful futures for people, for communities. I mean, this is one block in a fabric of Indianapolis and neighborhoods surrounding it. So we want to make sure we keep our peripheral vision wide open to understand all the design implications there. If you look at this diagram, the history we talked about a lot, there's roughly 100 years to the left on this, but we also have to think about the 100 years to the right on this. So I think a successful design is when a designer can have the humility and sensitivity and curiosity to fully study what's to the left, but then pivot and also have the audacity and the boldness and the vision to cast a forward-looking future. So we were really excited to be a part of this. Studs is an important part of Indianapolis and the design community. and think that that will continue into the future. So thank you. That's what we have. If there are questions, we are happy to open it up to any Q&A.
Bring back the camera and see if we can see the chat here.
Yeah, we've not looked at the chat, so we'll see if there's anything there. If you're thinking of anything now, go ahead and drop it in there.
Yeah, thank you, Cara and Jeremy. That was awesome. Yeah, just a reminder, guys, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A or the chat. They'll be hanging out to answer any questions that you guys have. While you're thinking about questions, I will give a little plug for Indie Design Week. If you have not seen the Stutz and the renovation and the beautiful work that DELV has done yet, our design and art market will be there on Saturday. So that's a great chance to pop over there, enjoy some of the food vendors that are in there, check out Turner's Bar, and check out a lot of vendors as well. So it should be a fun time on Saturday. You can go through the building and see what they've done. Oh, got one question. Did you deal with any pushback on your design plans, and how do you take feedback into consideration while trying to stay true to your vision? Good question.
Great question. I would say in general, there's always some level of pushback, and some of it is the constraints that we're given, whether it be budget or as you start to find new things in the building that make it more difficult. In this one, it's a little different, unique in the fact that the developers at the table as well, kind of helping shepherd the vision of the project. But I would say it's very common that the first plan, the first drawings do get changed, and it's always to the better many times. So I think it's always being receptive to that feedback. I think there's so many times where in the first couple of meetings, ideas are shared, and you have to share them, although you've put a lot of thought into them. It is a collective feedback that does make them better, and I think it's hard to kind of reflect back on projects where that hasn't been the case. So yeah, I'd say there's feedback, and I would say this is one where the contractor Shield Sexton was involved. We had a lot of involvement, and the voices that are there are adding more depth to it continuously. So I think in some ways it's like the feedback isn't necessarily pushback as much as bringing more clarity and I think layers of depth to making better decisions in this case.
Yeah, and as Jeremy said, I think pushback is a critical part of our design process, and it's planned for and desired. So often the larger scale and the more parameters that a piece of art touches, and it will get even more pushback. So absolutely, when we're dealing with an entire city block in downtown Indianapolis, there was many moments of pushback, as there should be. And so I think as designers, us both, again, having our teams having thick skin, because you kind of want to push things until somebody says, nope, that's too far. You need to do that, I think, to find the edges to create a successful design.
And I see a question about the redevelopment process, and that it's still ongoing. Honestly, there's still things that are happening. There's a vision for the neighborhood that's still kind of coming to fruition, and a lot of this too, the sensitivity of how do you renovate a building that is occupied, and part of that, the design process kind of goes concurrently with phasing. So the answer typically is longer than everyone wants it to be, and it is one of those because of the size of this project, it'll be going on for several years. And I'd say that, and there's better people to answer this than me because me and the calendar don't get along. But I want to say the design process was somewhere between around 8 months to a year to fully kind of begin to have the conversations all the way to the point where we're putting construction documents out. And then because of phasing, the construction happened over quite a period of time, kind of working its way through building by building. But also you've got engineering and systems that had to work its way through. So a lot of phasing.
Which in the scheme of things, that 8 month is actually a very tight timeline for a project of this scale as far as design goes. But then the interior fit outs, those that we did were separate projects with separate design. I love their question. Timelines.
Do you uncover any interesting artifacts or have a personal favorite that was preserved or reimagined? There's a lot of unique history, and as much as you feel like these buildings are just replicated, they're all unique in some way, which can cause some stress. I didn't realize that the F building has a basement that is a very, very deep basement. And Reggie Miller actually shot a commercial down there back in the day and autographed one of the walls. And when we worked there for 7 years, it's a stair you wouldn't want to necessarily go down. It wasn't encouraged to go down from the public. But you go down there, it used to actually be where the coal shoots. And it was like, I think there's like 15-foot floor to floor. And it's still something that I think that has some design ideas around it. And through the constraints of budget and time, had to kind of get paused. But that was kind of one of those spaces that we didn't know about that you find. There's other spaces that you find that you didn't want to find. They used to have a cardboard baler that would, underneath the car exhibit on the first floor was actually a basement that you don't know until you talk the history of the people who have been there for years, because the drawings don't necessarily show those elements. And as far as like kind of the artifacts of what Turner owned or the art that was in there, there's almost too much to imagine as you kind of went through. If you ever went to his office, it was basically his own museum in so many ways of what he's collected through the years.
What are some of your favorite sources of design inspiration? That's a fun question. I'll first maybe just shout out the concept of Indie Design Week, because I think it's really important to look outside of your own industry and outside of your own world, where you can get really kind of stuck in your process and your maybe competition or what others in your industry are doing. I think it really helps stimulate your mind and push you outside of maybe some creative boundaries when you look outside your own industry. So for us, looking into music and fashion and even writing, I will say personally, reading books, even fiction books and works that kind of help inspire your mind in different ways. I think visual references are really helpful as well, but that is a way I think to kind of make sure that your brain and your creativity is pliable and you're keeping that muscle very flexible as you continue. What about you?
I would just add, I think, so many times architecturally there's a lot of great resources, but until you travel and see something or a place, all of a sudden it makes more sense. I know S9 was a great partner on this, and they did Pond City Market to be able to see that, or Industry City, and kind of see how things have been dealt with that are either similar. I mean, very rarely are we reinventing the wheel. It's usually looking at the history of what's been done before and how it's shaped communities. So I think the more we can understand what's worked well and how you can kind of iterate on that is a very important part of it. And it's inspiring to see that. It gives you the kind of courage to know that you're not going into something that has been untested and undone, but it also gives you a chance to figure out how you can improve upon the last version of that.
Mm-hmm. I'll add to that. I think one source of design inspiration is often the clients themselves, even if they are not necessarily designers. They will ask questions or have thoughts that we wouldn't necessarily ask or think of. And that may feel like, well, obviously you don't do it that way, or here's a quick reason why. But if you follow that kind of trail, that's another opportunity to open up lines of questions and lines of thinking that you maybe thought, well, I'm not going to do that because it'll get VE'd out, value engineered out, which just cut from the budget. As I'm sure many of us, it's a reality, deal with budget constraints. And so you got to get creative within those.
See a question about, do we consider utilizing the rooftop space? Unsure if the structure allowed for it or not. The structural question is convoluted because there is capacity to do things on the rooftop. There's ways to do it. There was actually a lot of study through the years of how it could be activated. I think, again, it kind of goes back to, I think it's potential over time. It's just getting access to it. And I think it's more of a budget item. There used to be a small rooftop deck that was through one of the tenant spaces that would kindly share their codes. And it's a great view of the skyline.
Yeah.
But no, it's a great spot. We were not able to activate it in this initial phases, and be curious to know with Samara if there's any thoughts that down the road. But
where did we go to college? Where did we study? We both went to Ball State. We're just a couple years apart. So local, although neither Jeremy nor I are from Indiana originally, we found ourselves through Ball State, and then here both studied architecture. And I guess the question is how the startup got to where you are today. I'll say the shorthand is that I knew I wanted to be an architect since I was about 5 or 6 years old. I remember playing with blocks and having my little figurines inside these blocks and getting my head down and thinking, what is this space? I would create these little spaces and think, what does this feel like from their point of view? And so that thread, I think, has carried me all the way through what I chose to study, and then eventually, founding DELV with some really talented partners, and now we have incredibly talented staff and a team that I'm just really proud to work with, and I'm inspired by. I'm humbled by the talent that we get to work with here.
Agreed. Not too much to add. I was later knowing I wanted to be an architect. I loved art. I loved math. And I figured out that was the combination, I think, of between the two that found a balance that I could figure out how to utilize that. So for me, it was actually a very last minute decision. I was living in Minnesota and decided to become an architect. So got accepted to Ball State over the phone, and had my parents move me there the next week, and never looked back.
Awesome.
All right. I think that is the end of the questions. We have like 4 minutes. If anyone wants to get one last one in here, they could probably answer it. But otherwise, thank you guys again. Thank you both, Cara and Jeremy, for hopping on here and discussing that and answering all those questions as well. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks.
Oh, got a little clapping hand.
Wow.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys to all the attendees as well for joining. Just a reminder, we have workshop nights tonight downtown at Cinderwood. So come hang out with us, do some workshops. And then we've got virtual talks going all throughout the week as well. So, and hopefully some of you guys were able to hop into the coffee meetup at DELV today too and get a look at their beautiful space. So thank you both again. And thank you to the attendees. And this was recorded, so we'll send it out to everyone as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.